Emily had been talking about this dinner for weeks, like it was some milestone event on our calendar. Friday night, she'd say with a little lift in her voice. Just remember, it's important to me we're there. Everyone will be there. It's been too long. The way she said it made it sound like she was including me in something meaningful, but in truth, I wasn't sure what important meant anymore when it came from her. Lately, our conversations had been a mix of logistics, shallow updates, and occasional surface-level warmth, like two people playing at being in sync rather than actually feeling it. Still, I agreed without protest. I told myself that maybe, just maybe, a nice night out in an upscale setting with her family might soften the jagged edges that had been forming between us. When we arrived at the country club, I could see immediately that this wasn't just any dinner. The building loomed ahead in classic white-pillared form, its front lit by soft amber spotlights. Inside, chandeliers glowed above white-draped tables, casting warm reflections off crystal glasses. Waiters in pressed black jackets glided between tables with practiced, wordless efficiency. A small jazz trio played near the fireplace, the mellow notes weaving through the low hum of conversation. I was still taking in the details when Emily's posture changed. She straightened, smiled brightly, brighter than she'd smiled at me in weeks, and made a beeline for a man waiting near the entrance. "This is Victor," she said, as if the name alone should explain everything. "My business partner." He was tall, sharply dressed, with the kind of handshake that's more about image than sincerity. His eyes met mine for only a second before drifting back to Emily, like I was the polite intermission before he could get back to his main act. "Pleasure," he said smoothly, though I noticed his hand lingered on hers just a touch too long before releasing it. I told myself not to overanalyze, except the moment I stepped closer, Emily cut the space between us with a laugh. "Nathan's still figuring out what he wants to do with his career," she told Victor, her tone light and airy, but edged just enough to draw attention. It was the kind of joke she'd started telling more often lately, little pokes at my choices, my progress, my place in life. They were always delivered with that smiling shrug, the kind that invited people to laugh along, as if I'd be in on it too. But I wasn't. Victor chuckled politely, and Emily led us toward the long table where her family sat. The moment we joined, I realized I was walking into a chorus that had already been tuned to her key. We took our seats, her beside Victor, me across from them, and almost immediately she shifted into French. She'd been learning the language for the past few months, a hobby I had half supported, half ignored. I'd assumed it was just another interest she'd picked up like pottery or yoga. But now, as the words spilled out of her in fluid sentences, I realized she'd gotten good. What she didn't know, or maybe what she didn't care about, was that I'd learned enough from overhearing her practice sessions to follow most of what she was saying. And what she was saying was about me. Not directly cruel, not the kind of insults that would make the table go silent, but small, precise cuts. How I didn't get fine dining. How my job was comfortable but hardly ambitious. How I preferred simple weekends instead of cultural experiences. Each comment drew a soft chuckle from her relatives, a few nods, the occasional glance in my direction as if to check whether I'd caught the joke. Victor, of course, stayed close to her. Whenever the conversation slowed, he'd murmur something to her in French, his voice low, his hand finding hers for a quick squeeze or his fingertips brushing her wrist. The first time, I thought maybe it was unintentional. The second time, I started to feel the knot in my chest tighten. By the third time, I knew it wasn't an accident at all. I tried to engage in conversation with the others at the table, her uncle about his golf game, her mother about her garden, but every few minutes, my attention was dragged back to the quiet exchanges between Emily and Victor. The way she leaned slightly toward him. The way his hand rested on the back of her chair, casual but possessive. At one point, Emily caught me watching. She tilted her head, gave me a half smile, then turned back to Victor as if I'd been dismissed. The food came and went in courses I barely tasted. Delicate portions arranged like works of art, explained in detail by waiters whose voices faded in and out as my mind spiraled. By dessert, my smile had calcified. I was still playing my role, the polite partner, the attentive guest, but beneath the surface, I was clocking every detail. The timing of their touches, the shift in her tone when she spoke to him, the fact that she'd placed me at the farthest point from her at the table. I don't remember what the final joke was, the one that had her family laughing and her eyes darting toward me, testing my reaction, but I remember the feeling, that hot, slow burn under my skin. The sudden clarity that this wasn't just a harmless dinner. It was a performance. And I wasn't the co-star. I was the prop. I don't know how I made it through the rest of the evening without saying something I couldn't take back. I smiled. I nodded. I thanked the waiter. I even laughed once or twice, though it felt hollow in my throat. All the while, I was tucking away every moment in some mental file I knew I'd revisit later, when I could see it for what it really was. When we finally left the table, Emily slipped her arm through Victor's as they walked toward the lobby. It was brief, seconds at most, but it was enough to tell me that whatever was happening between them, I wasn't imagining it. And as we stepped out into the cool night air, her hand brushed mine, light as a feather, almost accidental. I let it fall away without taking it, because by then, I already knew something had shifted, and not in my favor. On the drive home from the country club, the city looked too clean, like someone had scrubbed the edges off it. Emily watched her reflection in the passenger window the whole way, adjusting a strand of hair that didn't need adjusting. We passed 3 green lights in silence before she said, "You were quiet tonight." And I said, "You were fluent." That was the last honest thing either of us said for the rest of the ride. Silence in a car is never quiet. It fills with reruns. Little scenes you ignored the first time because loving someone is part devotion, part selective blindness. I kept thinking about the last few months and how the warning signs had been filed under temporary, or work stress, or you're overthinking this, Nathan. It started with late nights. Twice a week became 4, and 4 became don't wait up. She said her team had a push, a crunch, a client who doesn't understand time zones. I didn't argue. I told myself this was what ambition looked like. Then she turned off location sharing. "Battery," she said, as though transparency drains faster than screen brightness. When she canceled dinner with my sister, she sent a photo of takeout on a desk, cardboard boxes and a laptop glowing like an alibi. The next time there was no photo, just 3 paragraphs of apology that read like something she'd copied and pasted from a handbook. She stopped meeting me halfway in small ways. Our shared grocery list used to be a mess of typos and inside jokes. Then it turned into tidy bullet points she added from somewhere else at odd hours. Our notebook for house projects, paint colors, a sketch for shelves, the garden plan, sat on the coffee table like a museum piece. I opened it one night and realized my last note was fresh. Hers was 3 months old. My handwriting had become a timeline of me trying. Her replies slowed. A "be there soon" shrank to later, which shrank to nothing. I'd text a photo of the half-burned garlic bread that I knew would make her laugh, and she'd send back a thumbs up 3 hours later. When she did call, it was from the car, her voice thin and metallic, the sound of someone driving away while explaining why they can't come home yet. New habits arrived like packages on a porch. A new perfume, sharp and clean, started living on her scarf. New clothes, not promotion blouse new, but I might run into someone and want to be remembered new. She started keeping cash in a separate wallet. She kept a second tote in her trunk, for the gym. Though the gym posted fewer of her check-ins, and the leggings in the laundry smelled like hotel soap. Then there was the French. At first it was a podcast chirping between our coffee mugs while toast popped. She'd pause it and repeat a phrase, laughing when she butchered the R. Later, the laughter dulled. She started putting in both AirPods. She wrote quick notes in a tiny Moleskine, neat slanted words I couldn't read unless I leaned in, and leaning in had stopped feeling welcome. She told me she liked French because it's precise. Precise is a good word for a scalpel too. I didn't want to be the guy who prints phone bills and circles numbers with a red pen. So I tried to be decent. I asked about her day and didn't keep score when she answered in headlines. I suggested date nights and didn't flinch when they became rain checks. I pretended I didn't notice when she muted her screen the second my footsteps hit the hallway. But my eyes adjusted to the dim. Pictures started showing up, not on our phones, but in the background of other people's lives. I'd see her in a coworker's story, laughing in a booth with strangers I'd never met. The caption something throwaway like, Team Fuel, and a croissant emoji. She took on a new smile in those photos, tilted and bright, like a person posing as herself. There was always at least one unfamiliar face angled toward her. I started recognizing the same watchband in different sh*ts, the same jawline half-framed by a shoulder. I told myself it was coincidence. Coincidence started to feel like a campaign. One Saturday we were supposed to repaint the hallway. She canceled an hour before with a crisis and a promise to make it up to me tomorrow. I drove into the afternoon to keep from staring at the empty roller trays. At a red light, I looked up and saw her on the far corner in the camel coat she only wears for dinners. A man beside her reached for the strap of her shoulder bag like he'd done it before. They crossed toward a cafe I knew. I pulled into a space a block away, then sat there with both hands on the wheel while my pulse did something I didn't recognize. I didn't go in. I didn't even take a picture. I told myself if I didn't make proof, I didn't make it real. Back home, I painted the hallway. I left the top edge near the ceiling messy. She'd always tease me about that. Mr. Almost. That night she came home early and said she loved the color. She didn't mention the cafe. We used to share passwords without thinking. Then I opened our photo cloud and saw blank thumbnails stamped with unable to load. The next day, everything reappeared, except my access to the shared albums said, maintenance. I closed the app and told myself outages happen all the time. I also told myself that if I asked, I'd sound accusatory. If I sounded accusatory, maybe that would be the problem. My tone, not her secrecy. That's another thing love does. It makes you afraid of being impolite while you drown. Our rituals thinned out. Sunday farmers market turned into, I need to swing by the office. Wednesday walks turned into, let's skip tonight. It looks like rain. On cloudless evenings. The little wins magnet list on the fridge. Her handwriting, mine, dumb victories like, fixed the squeaky hinge, stopped growing. New noises took their place. The midnight shower, the hairdryer at 6 a.m., the light tapping of a message arriving and her turning slightly away, like privacy were a posture. I told Dylan, my friend who believes everything is solvable if you put it in a spreadsheet. He said, get evidence before you burn it down. The way he said evidence made me feel like I was filing taxes wrong. I nodded anyway. Later, alone, I admitted to myself I didn't want evidence. I wanted her to trip over the truth and hand it to me, sorry and complete. After a while, the outside view of us started to look better than the real thing. We still posed for a birthday picture with her niece. We still sent a thank you text with too many exclamation points when someone dropped off soup. We posted a photo from a hiking trail, a perfect blue sky over our shoulders. 10 minutes after I took it, she stopped to answer an urgent thing. And I walked ahead and pretended the wind in the pines was enough company. If you'd asked me then what I needed, I would have said clarity. But clarity is a polite way to say permission. Permission to admit the story had changed on me, and not because of a plot twist I'd missed, but because one of the main characters had gotten bored and started improvising. I could feel her slipping her fingers out of mine, and I kept pretending it was because her palm was warm. August brought small, sharp proofs. A receipt in the laundry from a restaurant I'd suggested once, and she'd shrugged at, too fussy. A pair of wineglass rings pressed into a napkin in her tote. A single ticket stub from a movie I'd wanted to see together, creased like it had been folded and unfolded by someone who needed something to do with their hands. Each thing was defensible on its own. Together, they spoke French. The language thing kept evolving. She started peppering her English with French phrases, even when it didn't make sense. C'est compliqué, in place of, I'm not in the mood to explain. She added little notes in French to the whiteboard calendar, then wiped them off before I made coffee. If I asked what a word meant, she translated with the broadest brush. Just a reminder, she'd say. Or, just a joke. Jokes usually have a laugh. Back at the apartment after the country club, she said she was exhausted and went straight to bed. I stood alone in the kitchen with the light off and the city humming a floor below, and I thought about the way Victor's hand had found hers like muscle memory. I thought about how easily her family had laughed when she made those soft, precise cuts in a language they thought I couldn't understand. People reveal themselves when they think the room isn't listening. I rinsed a glass just to hear the water. The sound made the place feel occupied. Then I leaned on the counter and did the thing Dylan told me not to do. I counted the signs like they were beads, one by one. Late nights, muted screens, canceled plans, perfume, clothes, cash, French, strangers' photos, the cafe, the ticket, the receipt, the way her phone slept face down like a secret. I didn't need a corkboard. I needed courage. I wish I could say I slept. I didn't. I lay there and stared at the ceiling and replayed a spring afternoon in the hardware store, when she held a paint swatch up to the fluorescent light and said, "You always choose the safe colors," smiling like it was a compliment. I laughed and said, "Safe looks good on a wall." Did then. Now I'm looking at the hallway I painted alone, at that wobbly line near the ceiling, and all I can think is how easy it is to slip when you look away for a second. The signs were there. They'd been there for months. I just didn't understand the translation until tonight. I told Emily I needed to stretch my legs. Maybe take a call outside. She barely looked up from her conversation with Victor, her smile wide and unshaken. If she suspected anything in my tone, she didn't show it. The night air was cool as I stepped onto the veranda, the muted music and laughter from the dining hall fading into the background. The country club's garden lights cast little halos over trimmed hedges and gravel paths. I followed the curve of the lot until the voices from inside were just a distant hum. It wasn't until I reached the far edge of the parking area that I saw them. They stood in the shadows near a line of tall cypress trees, framed by the glow of a single lamppost. Emily's hands were buried in her coat pockets, her shoulders slightly hunched. Not in discomfort, but in that asterisk mate, folded in posture people take when they're letting someone close. Victor's hands moved when he talked, expressive, confident. Then one hand settled on her arm. He leaned in, said something I couldn't hear, and she laughed. Not the polite, airy laugh she'd been using at the table, but the real one, the one I used to work for. And then, without hesitation, she kissed him. It wasn't a timid, stolen thing. It was slow and deliberate, like they had done it before and didn't need to rush. I felt my pulse hammering in my ears, my fists clenching in my pockets. My mind raced in two directions at once. Half of me wanting to step forward and tear the moment apart, half of me frozen, watching as if from somewhere outside my own body. They didn't see me, or maybe they did and didn't care. When she finally pulled away, she brushed a strand of hair from her cheek and looked around as if re-entering reality. Victor said something low, his hand grazing hers one last time before they started walking back toward the club. I ducked behind a row of parked cars until they disappeared inside. For a minute, I just stood there in the dark, my breath visible in the cold air. The scene replayed in my head on a loop, sharper each time, the details etching themselves in permanent ink. The way she tilted her chin toward him, the easy familiarity in his touch, the lack of hesitation. There's a point where suspicion becomes certainty, and certainty changes everything. I didn't feel shocked, not really. This was the moment my mind had been preparing for over weeks, months maybe. What I felt was a strange, steadying clarity. I walked back toward the front entrance, but I didn't go in. Instead, I circled to the opposite side and slipped in through the side door near the restrooms. From there, I could see into the dining hall without being seen. Emily was back at the table, chatting with her aunt, Victor seated comfortably beside her as though they'd never left. She reached for her glass of wine, smiling, her cheeks faintly flushed. I thought about walking over, calling her out in front of her family. I pictured the faces turning toward us, the collective intake of breath, the shifting glances. But another idea took root, a cleaner exit, one she wouldn't see coming. That's when my eyes met Lily's. She was seated farther down the table, watching Emily with an expression I couldn't quite read, somewhere between disapproval and pity. Lily and I weren't close, but I knew enough to notice she hadn't laughed along with the French jokes earlier. When our eyes met, she gave the faintest shake of her head, like she'd seen more than she was willing to say aloud. I nodded, and in that moment a plan formed. I stepped into the hall, waited until the dinner noise swelled, then walked back into the dining room, not toward Emily but toward Lily. I leaned down, murmured something about needing to leave, and held out my hand. She hesitated only a second before placing hers in mine. I didn't look back at Emily. Not when we passed her end of the table. Not when her conversation faltered mid-sentence. Not when the room's energy shifted as people noticed the two of us walking out together. Outside, the cold hit us full in the face. Lily glanced at me but didn't ask where we were going. She must have read enough in my expression to know I wasn't looking for explanations, just a way out. By the time we reached my car, my phone was already buzzing in my pocket. Emily's name lighting up the screen. I ignored it, starting the engine. Lily didn't speak until we'd pulled out of the lot and the country club lights had faded in the rearview mirror. "You saw something, didn't you?" she asked quietly. I gripped the wheel a little tighter. "I saw enough." She nodded once, her gaze fixed on the road ahead. Neither of us said anything else for the rest of the drive. The phone kept buzzing in my pocket, and I knew it would keep buzzing until she ran out of words or nerve. But whatever Emily had to say now wasn't for me. It was for herself, for the version of the story she'd want to believe. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel the pull to listen. By the time we merged onto the main road, Emily's calls had stacked up like debris after a storm. 7 missed, 2 voicemails, 3 texts. I didn't open any of them. The glow from the dashboard made my hands look pale and tense on the steering wheel. Lily sat quietly in the passenger seat, her arms folded loosely, the way people do when they're careful not to intrude but still present if needed. The silence wasn't awkward. It was the kind of silence that fills itself, like both of us knew too much had already been said in other ways tonight. My phone buzzed again. This time, I glanced at the screen as we stopped at a red light. "Emily, I can explain. Please don't do this." "Emily, it wasn't what it looked like. Please answer." "Emily, you're overreacting. Let's talk at home." I felt a hollow laugh form in my chest but kept it in. Overreacting. That word has a way of making you feel like your reality is negotiable. The light turned green, and I pressed the accelerator harder than necessary. "Do you want me to say something to her?" Lily asked, breaking the quiet. Her tone wasn't eager. More like she was offering a first aid kit she wasn't sure I'd take. I shook my head. "No, this isn't your fight." She studied me for a moment, then nodded and went back to looking out the window. We didn't speak again until we reached her driveway. "Thanks for the ride," she said, hand on the door handle. She hesitated. "And, for what it's worth, I'm sorry." I wasn't sure if she meant for what she'd seen, for what I'd seen, or just for the general state of things. Either way, I nodded. "Get some rest, Lily." When I pulled away, the phone lit up again. Emily's persistence was almost mechanical now. Missed call, voicemail, text, repeat. I knew the pattern without even looking. The house was dark when I arrived, which told me 2 things. She wasn't home yet, and she hadn't stopped trying to reach me long enough to beat me here. I parked in the driveway and just sat there for a minute, staring at the front door. It was strange how a doorway could look like both an exit and a trap depending on the night. Inside, the quiet pressed against me. I left the lights off, went to the kitchen, and poured a glass of water I didn't drink. The phone kept buzzing on the counter. I let it. 10 minutes later, the sound of tires on gravel broke the stillness. Headlights swept across the living room walls, and then the front door opened. Emily stepped inside, her hair slightly windswept, cheeks flushed from the cold. She shut the door with a careful click, as if the sound might break something fragile. "Nathan," she said softly, spotting me in the kitchen doorway. "Can we please talk?" I didn't answer. She dropped her purse on the entry table, took a few tentative steps toward me. "I know what it looked like, but you have to believe me. It wasn't." "Don't," I said, my voice flat. "Don't start with what it wasn't." She froze. For a moment, the only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator. "It was just," she tried again. "Emily." I cut her off this time, more sharply. "I saw you. I saw you kiss him." Her mouth opened, closed. "It wasn't." She stopped herself this time, but the damage was done. The script was obvious. She'd been repeating it in her head all the way here, swapping out nouns, verbs, timelines until she landed on something she thought I might swallow. I took a slow breath. You know what bothers me most? Not the kiss. Not even the months of signs I ignored. It's that you're still looking at me like I'm supposed to give you the benefit of the doubt. Her eyes narrowed slightly, the softness gone. So what, you're just going to walk out with Lily? In front of my family? There it was. Not guilt, control. She didn't like losing her grip on the narrative. You made your scene before I ever left the table, I said. Mine just happened to be quieter. She laughed, short and sharp. You think that was quiet? You humiliated me. I almost smiled at that. Good. Now we're even. Her jaw tightened. Nathan, listen to me. Victor is a colleague. That's all. We've been working on a big project. There's been a lot of pressure. Pressure, I repeated, tasting the word like it might mean something different if I said it slowly. That's what that was out there? Pressure, relief? Her lips pressed into a thin line. The phone on the counter buzzed again. A message from Lily this time. You okay? I didn't reply, just turned the screen over so Emily wouldn't see. I'm not doing this tonight, I said finally, stepping past her toward the hallway. She turned as I passed, her voice rising. You're not walking away from me, Nathan. I stopped but didn't face her. You're right. I'm driving. In the bedroom, I packed an overnight bag. Not because I didn't know where I stood, but because I did. Sometimes space isn't for cooling down. It's for not freezing in place. She followed me to the door. Where are you going? Away from here, I said. Away from this conversation before it becomes something worse. She reached for my arm, but I stepped back. Don't. Her voice cracked. You're blowing this out of proportion. I opened the door, the cold rushing in between us. No, I'm just refusing to make it smaller than it is. I left her standing there, the porch light washing over her pale face, and got into the car. My phone buzzed twice before I even reached the end of the block. By morning, the group chat her family used for everything from holiday plans to dinner photos was alive with activity. 2 cousins wanted to clear the air. Her mother was concerned about last night's misunderstanding, and Lily had left the conversation entirely. That told me more than anything else. I ignored all of it, turned my phone off, and watched the sunrise from the quiet of an empty parking lot. Some people think the worst part of betrayal is the act itself. I was starting to realize the real damage comes after, when you see how far the person will go to pretend it never happened. The morning after the country club felt like waking up in a room where someone had rearranged all the furniture. Nothing was where it used to be, but you couldn't quite put your finger on what had moved first. I'd left the house before Emily woke up, if she slept at all. My overnight bag was still in the back seat, and the smell of yesterday's coffee clung to the inside of the car. I drove without a destination until the gas gauge hovered near empty. Somewhere between the strip of fast food chains and the half-abandoned outlet mall, my phone buzzed back to life. Emily, we need to talk. Emily, last night was a mistake. Emily, come home, please. The word mistake kept flashing in my mind like a broken neon sign. Mistake implies you tripped into something by accident, that there was a split-second lapse in judgment followed by immediate regret. A mistake isn't premeditated. It doesn't last months. It doesn't involve learning an entire language to hide your running commentary from the person you share a bed with. By the time I pulled into the driveway, her car was gone. I didn't go inside right away, just sat there, watching the sunlight creep across the hood. My hands stayed on the wheel even after I cut the engine. When I finally went in, the living room looked staged, like she'd tidied up in anticipation of some kind of truce. The throw blanket was folded neatly over the couch. The coffee table was clear except for 2 mugs placed side by side. Peace offering, maybe. I walked past them without stopping. In the kitchen, my phone buzzed again, this time a call. I answered. Nathan? Her voice was careful, like she wasn't sure who might be listening. Can we meet somewhere? Neutral ground. I almost laughed. Neutral ground? You mean somewhere public so I don't make a scene? Silence. Then, please. We settled on a cafe downtown. I got there first, claimed a table in the corner where I could see the door. She arrived 10 minutes later in a camel coat and dark sunglasses, looking like she'd walked straight out of the version of her life that didn't include me. She slid into the seat across from me, removing her glasses but not meeting my eyes right away. "Nathan, I need you to hear me out. I've heard enough," I said. She pressed her lips together. "It wasn't serious." "That's your opener?" I leaned back in my chair. "You're going to tell me it wasn't serious after I watched you kiss him?" Her voice sharpened. "You think a single moment erases everything we've been through?" "No," I said quietly. "I think everything we've been through erases a single moment's excuse." She blinked at that, and for a second I thought she might actually absorb it. But then she shifted gears, her voice softening into the kind of tone you use with someone you think might still be persuaded. "Nathan, I know I crossed a line, but I was under so much stress. And Victor, I held up a hand. "Don't finish that sentence. I don't care what he just." Her shoulders slumped. "So that's it? You're just done?" "I was done the second I saw you with him," I said. "Everything since then has just been the paperwork." She stared at me for a long moment, then laughed. A short, humorless sound. "And what about Lily? Walking out with her like that, in front of everyone? Was that supposed to prove a point?" "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe it was just the first time in months I didn't feel like I was in the wrong room." Her eyes narrowed. "She's family." "Not my family," I said, standing. "Not anymore." I left her sitting there, the untouched coffee between us cooling by the second. 2 days later, she showed up at my door. No sunglasses this time, no coat. Just a gray sweater I recognized from weekends on the couch, back when weekends still felt like hours. She knocked lightly, like she was afraid the sound might break something fragile between us. "Nathan," she said when I opened the door, "I just want to talk." "You've had weeks to talk," I said, blocking the doorway with my arm. "This is different." She glanced past me into the living room. "Please, 5 minutes." Against my better judgment, I stepped aside. She moved to the couch but didn't sit, just stood there, twisting her hands together. "I'm ending it with him," she said. "Good for him," I replied. Her brow furrowed. "I'm serious. It's over. I told him I couldn't do this anymore." I leaned against the doorframe. "You couldn't? Or you got caught?" Her face tightened. "Why are you being like this?" "Because you're talking about ending something you shouldn't have started while standing in the house you've been lying in," I said. "And you want credit for it." She sat down finally, like the weight of the conversation had pushed her there. "I miss us, Nathan. I miss what we had." "What we had doesn't miss you back," I said. Her eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. "So that's it?" she whispered. "You're not even going to try?" "I did try," I said. "You just weren't looking." I walked to the door and opened it. She stayed seated for a moment, like maybe she thought I'd change my mind if she didn't move. When I didn't, she stood, pulled her coat tighter around her, and walked out without looking back. The next week was quieter. Not peaceful, peaceful implies resolution, but quiet in the way of a house that knows it's about to be emptied. I started sorting through drawers, boxing up the overlap between her life and mine. Half the mugs, most of the books, the sweaters she always stole from my side of the closet. She called twice more. I didn't answer. The third time, she left a voicemail. "Nathan, I get it. You're angry. You're hurt. But this doesn't have to be the end. We can fix it. I'm willing to do whatever it takes." I deleted it without listening to the rest. When the movers came for her things, I stayed in the kitchen, drinking coffee and pretending the sound of tape ripping and boxes closing didn't mean anything. One of the movers asked if I wanted to label the last box. "No," I said. "She'll know what's hers." By the time they left, the rooms felt bigger, not because there was more space, but because the air was different, lighter, less staged. I stood in the doorway of the bedroom, looking at the empty side of the closet, and realized it wasn't a void. It was potential. That night, I sat on the porch and watched the streetlights flicker on one by one. Somewhere down the block, a neighbor's dog barked, and a kid's bike clattered onto a driveway. Normal